On this Sunday night, games over. Team Canada leaves Tokyo on a high note, capping off a record run at the Summer Games. And the future is looking up.
Just do what you want to do what you love, and just go for it.
Open the gates. Starting Monday, fully vaccinated American tourists can enter Canada, even as COVID cases climb to new heights south of the border. And election rejection. As the Trudeau government prepares to drop the writ, how do Canadians feel about heading to the polls in a pandemic?
Canadians are not into an election.
Global National with Robin Gill. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
And that's a wrap in Tokyo. The 2021 Summer Games went out with a bang today. A spectacular and upbeat ceremony at the Olympic Stadium. It was a celebratory atmosphere despite the lack of spectators. And for Team Canada, there is much to celebrate. Good evening and thank you for joining us. Canada's Olympians are now heading home from Tokyo, carrying some precious cargo. The Canadians captured more medals than in any other non-boycotted Summer Games. Team Canada earned 7 gold medals, tying our total from Barcelona back in 1992, a national record. 6 silvers are also coming home, most of those won on or in the water, along with 1 from the track. And Canada also earned 11 bronze, bringing our total medal count to 24. The athletes braved intense heat and unprecedented pandemic restrictions. Crystal Goomansingh has more on Canada's record run.
From start to finish, the Tokyo Games captured headlines. The first Olympics to be delayed, the first to ban spectators, the first to restrict touching. But Canada's 371 athletes were focused.
It's still just slowly coming in now. Every time I'm hearing gold medalist, Olympic champion, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's real. It's not a dream.
Kelsey Mitchell's gold on the final day of the Games propelled Canada's medal tally to 24, the nation's second best showing at the Summer Olympics since 1984.
I remember when I was growing up, sitting on the couch and watching athletes like Donovan Bailey and Katrina LeMaidon with my mom on the couch and seeing how much effect that they had on my life and inspired me.
Damian Warner carried the flag with a full heart at the closing ceremonies. He was crowned the world's greatest athlete as the decathlon gold medal winner. Canada scored new titles and broke records in Japan. Penny Oleksiak is now Canada's most decorated Olympian with 7 medals. Andre DeGrasse won 3 medals, adding to the 3 he earned in Rio. Not to mention that nail-biting golden victory for the women's soccer team.
At event after event, we witnessed the quality and the depth of world-class performances that left us in awe.
Huge accomplishments under any circumstances, but even more impressive as the athletes played in the middle of a pandemic against the will of many locals. The International Olympic Committee says despite 430 COVID-19 cases reported inside the Games bubble, the competition has been a success.
Nobody who took part in these games will ever forget these Olympic Games. They are unique and they are a great manifestation and a great symbol of hope.
It's so nice to race again. It was so nice to compete again.
That competitive spirit now in the air in Paris. Organizers for the 2024 Games will no doubt have an easier job than their Japanese counterparts. For the athletes, the pressure and desire to achieve will be the same. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
And later in the newscast, we'll take a closer look at Canada's Olympic young guns who stole the show in Tokyo. And the excitement in Tokyo isn't over yet. Celebrations will ramp up once again with the opening of the 2021 Paralympic Games. Thousands of athletes from around the world will compete in 539 events.
Canada take the gold medal.
Canada's top Paralympians took part in this new campaign called We're Here. It aims to steer the conversation about Canada's Paralympians away from athletic merit and drive it toward sheer confidence and even swagger. A total of 128 Canadian athletes, including guides, will be competing in 18 sports. The action kicks off on August 24th. To BC now, where firefighters have caught a much-needed break in the weather. Clearer skies and calmer winds are offering temporary reprieve from fires that have forced thousands from their homes. Many in the Okanagan region are furious with the provincial government, claiming their early warnings were ignored. Emad Agahi reports from Kamloops tonight.
Well, as the residents of fire-ravaged community of Monty Lake pick up the pieces, frustration remains over how they may have been portrayed as irresponsible by BC officials for staying behind and defying evacuation orders at the peak of the fire.
There's no one here. There's 5 of us or whatever there is. I don't even know what the number is. We can't cover it. I have not talked to one BC fire guy in 3 days in here.
There's no other help, no outside help.
The wildfire exploded in size and ripped through the Monty Lake community on Thursday and Friday. It has burned structures and vehicles, but residents defying evacuation orders say it was them who saved any remaining buildings and homes from the flames. They say leaving was not an option because they felt they had to protect properties. Among these devastated communities, there are some who are frustrated with what they say is a lack of official personnel on the ground in those areas that suffered the most damage.
People have been screaming for help, like, where's the air tanker support? And it's just excuse after excuse. And it's just really disappointing to watch this thing and live every day with the anxiety.
We are responding with what resources and equipment and all that we do have available to us, and it is definitely a top priority and has been since detection.
Currently, there are more than 100 firefighters, 13 helicopters being used, and 38 pieces of heavy equipment on the ground. The fire hasn't seen much growth since Friday night. It still sits at 55,000 hectares. Now, as for conditions, Sunday, they are favorable for crews. It is cooler, it is humid, and there is some rain in the forecast, which will give those crews a bit of a break because hot and dry conditions are back on Monday. Jeff.
Thanks, Emad. To the pandemic now, and Ontario is reporting 423 new cases of COVID-19 today. That's the most in the province since late June. And it's a similar picture right across the country, with cases rising in many provinces. From tomorrow, fully vaccinated Americans will be allowed to cross the border into Canada for non-essential trips. As Seán O'Shea reports, for border towns, it's about time.
506 days. That's how long these border bridges have been closed to Americans wanting to come to Canada.
I think it's about time for things to get reopened again.
Only essential travelers have been allowed to cross since the beginning of the pandemic. Starting Monday, American travelers who follow new rules are welcome to cross again.
Be deemed to be fully vaccinated and also understand that it has to be one of the Health Canada approved vaccines.
For border businesses here, it's like a new beginning.
Typically 25% of the tourists come from the U.S. and they represent 50% of the revenue.
In nearby Niagara-on-the-Lake, that means more people going for carriage rides.
I'm hoping so. Fingers crossed, that's all we can hope for.
At the local Irish pub, many Americans were regulars.
They're considered our locals that come all the time, so not having them for over a year has been dramatic.
At the world-famous Shaw Festival, the theater staged its first indoor production in more than a year on Saturday night.
Everybody in the whole place was crying, actually. It was kind of the most remarkable moment of coming back joyously celebrating together.
Americans usually make up 40% of the audience.
We love those visitors. So seeing them start to come back, vaccinated people crossing the borders, makes sense to us.
And yet, as Ontario's COVID-19 case numbers start creeping up again, some Canadians are cautious about seeing foreign visitors.
Cases keep spiking, and just like driving up numbers of people who aren't vaccinated, who are just going to push our cases up, is just going to delay our inevitable return to normal, which we're probably never going to get to.
But because visitors must be tested and vaccinated, a surge of tourists is not expected right away.
There's been weddings missed, funerals missed. I think that'll be the first thing, families.
I have a couple of friends who I know they have family on the other side of the border, and it's been tough for them because haven't been able to see their family in a year and a half now.
That wait is now almost over as border crossings around Canada prepare to allow Americans in again. As for when Canadians can drive across the U.S. border, the American government hasn't answered that question yet. Jeff.
Seán O'Shea reporting in Niagara Falls for us tonight. Thanks, Seán. And as Seán just mentioned, Canada is opening its doors to vaccinated American tourists despite cases of COVID-19 climbing right across the United States, including in communities just south of the border. Take a look at this map. Almost every state is now in the red zone, meaning the level of community transmission is at its highest. Even as cases climb, the U.S. vaccination rate lags behind Canada and the European Union, and hospitals are once again filling up. This week, one American father who chose not to get vaccinated and became infected made this desperate plea from his hospital bed in Virginia.
For every single breath, like slinging an axe trying to bust wood. Please go get vaccinated.
The U.S. is sinking deeper into its fourth wave. New infections are now at a 6-month high, and the rest of the world is once again taking notice. Reggie Cicchini reports from Washington.
The scenes are reminiscent of a time the U.S. thought it might never return to. Daily infections are topping 100,000. Community spread is now substantial to high everywhere, including all 11 border states.
It is, as we've said, a pandemic and an outbreak of the unvaccinated.
This latest wave has taken a devastating toll on the U.S. South, including Florida. Testing sites are once again bumper to bumper as the state breaks records for cases. There are so many people in hospital, elective surgeries are being postponed, with most public health measures to slow the spread, like masking and capacity limits, no longer in place.
I think we ought to use every public health tool we can when people are dying.
That becomes difficult in a place like Florida, where politics plays a heavy hand. The state's governor has threatened to cut off funding if any school implements a mask mandate. But troubling signs lie ahead. Arkansas and Georgia, which returned to class last week, have at least 1,300 students already in quarantine. Most aren't eligible for the vaccine.
If you have a lot of disease in the community, you may get disease in the school. The whole point is to have disease not transmitted in the school.
While large gatherings are helping to drive this surge, it's the unvaccinated who are the vector of Wave 4, as daily deaths spike to around 500, sparking discussions amongst EU nations that it might be time to shelve inbound American travel. The bloc lifted a ban in June as the U.S. appeared to be on a course of control. Non-essential travel could once again be cut off, a move that would see Canada one of the few nations welcoming Americans in as the country struggles to keep the virus out.
Now, the CDC is still advising against U.S. travel into Canada, but when it comes to allowing people across its borders, there's still no criteria. A vaccine mandate is in discussion, but it remains to be seen if the U.S. will require travelers to have received only FDA-approved vaccines. That could omit anyone with AstraZeneca or a mixed dose. Jeff?
Reggie Cicchini in Washington. Thanks, Reggie. As American troops pull out of Afghanistan, the Taliban has seized 3 provincial capitals in a single day. This is the scene in Kunduz after the Taliban captured the governor's office, police headquarters, and a prison. The city is a strategic crossroads with access to the country's capital, Kabul. The Taliban also claimed 2 nearby capitals. But despite the advance, the U.S. is moving ahead with the final withdrawal of its troops after nearly 2 decades in Afghanistan. Still ahead, kids and COVID-19. As unvaccinated children prepare to return to the classroom, what parents need to know about the risks. Welcome back. COVID-19 is fast becoming a disease of the unvaccinated. They account for almost 90% of Canada's latest cases. No vaccine is approved for children under the age of 12 who are heading back to school in just a matter of weeks. With the risk of a possible 4th wave, it's a nerve-wracking time for many parents. But how worried should they be? Heather Urix-West has this reality check.
When Desiree McHugh first noticed mysterious marks on her teenage daughter last March, she thought it was some kind of rash.
We reached out to the doctor. He said it wasn't rashes, it's bruising. So just random bruising showing up all over her arms, her chest, her neck, her shoulders, her face.
Just one of several strange symptoms the 15-year-old has been struggling with for months. after a COVID-19 infection last fall.
It's an evolving topic, and we're still really trying to drill down on quantifying exactly what is the risk of long COVID and what symptoms do children manifest.
Dr. Stephen Friedman has been studying COVID-19's effect on kids for the last year and a half. He says while by and large children are far less likely to experience serious disease, it's far from impossible.
We do still see some children, uncommonly and infrequently, who do become severely unwell, sometimes during the acute illness, but almost even sometimes more commonly afterwards when they develop this inflammatory syndrome called multisystem inflammatory syndrome of children, which can result in more critical illness.
There have been more than 40 cases of Miss C in Alberta alone. 7-year-old Hunter McConnell became ill following a COVID infection last May.
We spent 3 days in the ICU, a couple days on the other unit. He's still being followed by cardiology, infectious disease.
While rare, doctors expect to see more cases of Miss C and long COVID in kids through the Delta-fueled fourth wave. Parts of the U.S. are already seeing more children in hospital compared to previous waves.
It's a little difficult to say if the increased number of children that we're seeing being admitted with complications of COVID is due to something about Delta intrinsically, or is it due simply to the fact that Delta is such a contagious virus that we're now seeing more cases?
It's why both doctors support masks in school this fall, particularly for children still ineligible for vaccine. The risk may be rare, but families like the McHughes know it's not impossible. Heather Urex West, Global News, Calgary.
Just ahead, Ottawa prepares for an impending election. But how do Canadians feel about casting a ballot in a pandemic? There is growing anticipation in Ottawa that a federal election call could come any day now. For weeks, the Liberal government has been dropping hints, and the other parties are now preparing to hit the campaign trail. But with the pandemic still looming large, are Canadians really in the mood for politics? Michael Couture went to find out.
With pandemic restrictions easing across the country, cities are coming back to life. But a federal election is looming on the horizon, and it seems the average Canadian would rather hit a patio than head to the polls.
There's just too much. It's fine as it is right now. There's too much going on. Let's just let this ride out.
I think we don't need a disruption in policy that's getting people potentially back to work.
Canadians are not into an election. They're not feeling especially political at the moment.
Pollster Daryl Bricker says recent surveys show the majority of Canadians believe the pandemic won't be done even in the next year. So, if an election is called soon, he cautions the Liberals against making the ballot question about how the government managed the pandemic response.
To go out and claim victory and ask for a referendum on your performance seems like you're asking for an evaluation of in a hockey game after the first period.
To that end, the number of cases of COVID-19 are on the rise, with the Delta variant continuing to spread. Now, there have been successful provincial elections during the pandemic, even before vaccines were available. That's why this former Liberal strategist says opposition parties can't criticize the Liberals if they do trigger a vote.
So that's a tough thing if you're the leader of the NDP or you're the leader of the Conservatives. When your provincial counterpart held an election, and perhaps in the case of at least one leader, you participated in that election, you campaigned for them.
How do you do?
In those votes, BC Premier John Horgan converted his minority government into a majority, as did Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick. Those successes may be what's motivating Prime Minister Trudeau as he watches his poll numbers.
They are close to majority territory, but it's far from a slam dunk. So, and campaigns matter. So a lot of things could happen during a campaign. So I think pulling the trigger will be risky.
But it could be a risk the Prime Minister believes is worth taking. Michael Couture, Global News, Ottawa.
Up next, passing the torch. As the Olympics wrap up in Tokyo, Team Canada's future is looking bright. Welcome back. There were many magical moments for Team Canada in Tokyo, and it was often our youngest athletes who stood tallest atop the podium. Canada is traditionally considered a Winter Olympics contender, but as Julia Foy reports, a new generation of summer athletes is raising the bar.
Drive those knees up. That's it. Good job.
16-year-old Caden Lee from Surrey, BC, has been running for several years, and he gets inspiration from the best.
I was following closely with Andre DeGrasse. His 200 was the most impressive, especially for me, as his kick down the backstretch was pretty exhilarating to watch.
In the under-18 category, Caden recently broke a Thunderbird Track and Field Club record for a mile run that was set back in 1984.
I ran in the very low 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I barely inched it out.
As the Tokyo Olympics wrap up and Canadian athletes head for home, some of the youngest superstars, including Canada's most decorated Olympian, swimmer Penny Alexiak, have a message for those who will follow their own dreams.
Just do what you want to do what you love, and just go for it. You know what I mean? I think that's something that I've always tried to kind of get across.
At age 14, Summer McIntosh is Canada's youngest Olympian. She says it was never too early for her to look to the future.
It's been a childhood dream of mine since I was like 5 because of my mom, and it was just such a thing for me. I've always been quite competitive when it comes to basically anything, so I'm just really excited to be able to say that I went to the Olympics.
A director at Western University's International Center for Olympic Studies says we need to build on the success of this Summer Olympics.
The youth of Canada need a real boost right now, and particularly around physical activity and sports. So for us to do well in 2024, we have to at least maintain, if not enhance, what we have done previously.
3, 2, 1.
As for Caden, could an Olympics be in his future?
If I were to compete in the Olympics, I would be hoping to compete in the 1500 or maybe the 5K if I get stronger in that event. But right now, I'd like to look at more shorter-term goals, and I'd like to see where post-secondary, like I said, will bring that to me.
60!
Julia Foy, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Jeff Semple. And for the last day of the Olympics, we're going out with a bang. A spectacular finale above Tokyo's National Stadium. Thank you, or arigato, for watching. Have a great night.